Hi everyone, I'm Michael Collett and I am very excited to be here at VOCE Global to tell you about everything that we're doing with voice at the ABC. I'm really excited and honoured to be among the speakers at this year's event. And as you might have already guessed from my accent, it's the Australian Broadcasting Corporation that I'm going to be talking about, and not the American TV channel that some of you might be more familiar with. So, over the next half hour, I'll be telling you about how the ABC has been making the most of the voice revolution. And specifically, I'll be talking about how we've been making data conversational in order to power what we hope could be the future of hyperlocal news. Just to introduce myself a bit more before we move on, I'm a conversation designer on the Future Focus team at the ABC. And basically, the Future Focus team was set up to make sure that the ABC had a home on any new and emerging platforms and technologies. So right now, it's our job to make sure that ABC content has a home on voice platforms like Alexa and Google Assistant. Before I was a conversation designer, I was also a journalist for over a decade. So it really is news media in particular that's my passion and expertise. So, a quick overview of what we'll be talking about today. First, I'm going to tell you about all the different things the ABC is currently doing on voice platforms. Then, I'll tell you about our very first custom voice app, which we released on Alexa late last year. And then finally, I'll be telling you about how the work we've been doing to make data conversational could be our first step towards hyperlocal and partially automated news streams. Firstly, I wanted to give you some background on what the ABC has been doing with voice over the past few years. If you don't know anything about the ABC, we're basically Australia's version of the BBC. So we're a national broadcaster, just like them, and we're also taxpayer funded. So we've got multiple TV channels, dozens of radio stations scattered across the country, and then multiple websites and mobile apps too. Our history of making premium audio content goes back 90 years, so you can see why we would be excited by the rise of new voice technologies. So like I mentioned before, the team I work on, Future Focus, has been working to make sure as much of our content as possible is accessible via voice. We've worked really closely with both Amazon and Google to help make that happen. And we're really proud to say that on both Alexa and Google Assistant, we are currently the default response when people ask for the news. So in Australia, if you say a phrase like, "Okay Google, what's the news?" or "Alexa, what's the latest on coronavirus?" you'll get a response from the ABC. Currently, these are the news services that we offer on smart speakers. So firstly, we're creating quick news briefings that cover the top headlines. Our team of journalists and producers are regularly updating these throughout the day to make sure they reflect the latest stories. These also come in both audio and video form to match the type of device that the user has. And then as well as these news briefings, we also offer a long-form news stream of individually packaged and highly polished audio news stories from our network of radio journalists. This is what we currently offer as part of Alexa's news channel experience, and we've received a lot of praise for it. So much so, actually, that we're now offering the news stream on our own first-party platforms as well. Getting the best of our news content onto smart speakers has been our biggest priority, but that's not all that we've done. As well, we also launched our video on demand service, called iView, on Alexa. We used Amazon's Video Skills Kit for this, so that we didn't have to create it ourselves from scratch. And finally, we've also made our radio streams and podcasts available on Google Assistant and Alexa. Now currently, these are only available via third-party aggregators, so your TuneIns and your Apple Podcasts, etc. But as much as possible, we want to be the masters of our own destiny on Alexa, Google Assistant, and other voice platforms. And ideally, that would mean delivering our content ourselves via our own first-party voice apps. So that brings us to our first custom voice app, which we released late last year. As of October 2021, you can now get an emergency update for any town or suburb across Australia on your smart speaker using the ABC Emergency Voice app. The Voice app supports all the usual phrases, so you can simply say, "Open ABC Emergency," or even just, "Are there any emergencies near me?" and we'll guide you to where you want to go. Or instead, you can get exactly what you want straight away through a one-shot phrase, like, "Alexa, ask ABC Emergency to give me an update for Tamworth." During the recent flood events on Australia's east coast, users who were asking Alexa for the weather were also being told how they could get emergency information via the ABC Emergency Voice app, which made a big difference for our discoverability. So what made us choose ABC Emergency for our first voice app? Well, if you know Australia, you know that we have a lot of natural disasters. So when we're not battling fires, we're usually battling cyclones or floods. And that includes the Brisbane floods that flooded this street just 100 metres from my apartment a couple of months ago. As Australia's national broadcaster, we don't just feel an obligation to provide coverage of these emergencies. We actually really do have an obligation. A few years ago, the ABC began a project to centralise data from all of Australia's emergency services on the one platform for the first time. Creating an ABC Emergency Voice app as part of this was part of the plan from the beginning, as was creating an ABC Emergency website. We launched the website in 2020, and the great thing about it is that it makes emergency data easily searchable and viewable on a map, so you can quickly see everything that's happening near your location. But we wanted to make getting emergency updates even quicker and more accessible. We wanted people to be able to simply ask their smart speaker a question like, "Are there any emergencies near me?" in the same way that they might ask about the weather. The user testing that we did also vindicated our intuitions about this, that this is something that our audiences would really value. So let's give the ABC Emergency Voice app a quick listen so that you know exactly what it is that I'm talking about.
Alexa, are there any emergencies near me?
Welcome back to ABC Emergency. The registered location of your Alexa device is Chelmer. Would you like an emergency update for that location?
Yes.
There are currently 3 emergency events within 50 kilometres of Chelmer. Incident 1, the Bureau of Meteorology has issued a minor flood warning for the lower Brisbane River. Would you like more information about this?
Yes.
Minor flooding is occurring along parts of the lower Brisbane River, with a peak around the minor flood level occurring on the overnight high tide at Brisbane City. Flooding is continuing across the lower Brisbane River following heavy rainfall during last week. Further shower activity is expected over the next few days, with the possibility of more significant rainfall from Friday. The situation will continue to be monitored closely and further warnings will be issued as required. Incident 2, the Bureau of Meteorology has issued a marine wind warning summary for Capricornia Coast, St. Lawrence to Burnett Heads, Fraser Island Coast, Sandy Cape to Double Island Point, Sunshine Coast Waters, Double Island Point to Cape Morton. Incident 3, the Queensland Fire and Emergency Services says there is a fire at North Stradbroke Island. Should I tell you more?
Yes.
There is a vegetation fire at this location. Smoke may affect residents and motorists in the area. Residents should close their doors and windows and keep medication close by if suffering from a respiratory condition. Motorists should use caution and drive to conditions. If you believe your property is under threat, you should call 000 000 immediately. For more information about emergency events across Australia, go to abc.net.au/emergency.
So that's the ABC Emergency Voice app. And in case you're wondering what it looks like on a screen device, here it is. We used an Alexa template that's actually more commonly used for recipes, but it worked quite well for our use case as well. So in this example, a user can just tap the screen to skip straight to the specific emergency that they want information about. Something else that I wanted to mention as well is that if an emergency is severe enough, we will tell users how they can ask Alexa for their closest ABC local radio station so they can get more information. So let's break down what's going on in that demo I just played for you. The emergency alerts you heard are available for every town and suburb across Australia. That's more than 15,000 of them. Basically, all we need from a user is the name of their town or suburb, and then we'll be able to tell them about any floods, fires, storms, etc. near that location. And these emergency alerts are getting updated constantly, actually every 5 minutes, to ensure we're always giving people the latest information from our emergency services. Now, I want to go into a little bit more detail about the design of the VOCE app, because firstly, hopefully you'll find this stuff as interesting as I do. But secondly, this has a lot of relevance for where we think the ABC can take voice in the future. There were really two separate design hurdles that we had to overcome in order to make this VOCE app a reality. Firstly, and most obviously, there was creating the conversational user interface and the natural language understanding model of the VOCE app itself. But separately to that, we needed to create natural language generation scripts so that we could turn the emergency data that we had access to into actual sentences that could then be read out by Alexa. Let's talk about the design of the CUI and NLU first. In certain ways, the design we were going for was actually quite simple. We weren't trying to allow for big, long, open-ended conversations. Instead, we were creating a transactional service. We just wanted a user to tell us their location so that we could then tell them about any emergencies near that location. The interactions really were designed to be as short and sweet as possible. But, on the other hand, the VOCE app that we created was, in some ways at least, a bit more complicated than creating a weather service. With a weather service, there's always exactly one weather at a location. But with an emergency service, we needed to be able to handle a wide variety of scenarios. So there might be no emergency events near a location, or just the one, or there might be 5 or dozens. So as an example, if there were 10 fires near a location, we didn't want to have to tell the user about them one by one. Instead, we wanted to be able to tell the user that there were 10 fire events near them, and then let them decide if they wanted more information. As many of you would know, even relatively simple voice apps have a lot of complexity like this under the hood. Appearances really can be deceiving. So we needed a robust tech stack to make our lives easier when creating the ABC Emergency Voice app. We chose to use the Jovo framework, which allows you to build the voice app once and then deploy it on multiple platforms with minimal fuss. And the way we did this was by creating machine-readable spec files that really blurred the lines between the design process and the development process. When coming up with a way to design our voice app, we were heavily influenced by the approach of creating situational design storyboards that was pioneered by Alexa. You might have seen storyboards just like this one before. The difficulty that we had was that while creating storyboards like this is really useful for ideating at the start of the design process, they can quickly become unwieldy. When your project requires dozens and dozens of these storyboards, it's very hard to keep them consistent with one another. And we found it next to impossible to get them to the point where they could be simply handed over from a designer to a developer. Basically, what we did was make machine-readable versions of these storyboards that we've called design specs. Our voice app was designed using dozens and dozens of specs, just like this one, that we created using the YAML programming language. This was really a collaborative effort. I worked really closely with our developer when creating these design specs to make sure they were formatted correctly and then could be implemented correctly in the final build. Not only do these specs act as the design for the voice app, they also act as the test suite for the finished build to ensure that what we release into the wild is fully reflective of our design. And because the specs are machine readable, we get error messages if any of them don't line up with each other correctly. So we don't have to go looking for the needles in the haystacks ourselves. Let's take a closer look at this one. The format is a lot like the situational design storyboard that we were looking at before. At the top of this particular design spec, you can see a few settings. So you can see that this particular spec is picking up from an earlier conversation thread, and it applies when there is just a single emergency event at the user's chosen location. We can create as many settings as we need. So, for instance, some of our specs only apply for first-time users, or some of our specs only apply for users who have set a favorite location. This lets us utilize best practice situational design and create different experiences to different users based on their specific contexts. You can also see how these design specs are integrated with our data platform. This spec is showing what happens when the ABC Emergency Voice app is telling a user about an emergency event. The voice app gives the user a short overview of the emergency event and then asks the user if they'd like more information about it. But obviously, the actual words that the voice app speaks to the user will need to change depending on what the emergency event is. So what this spec is showing is that we need to do a call of our emergency data platform in order to determine exactly what words should be spoken to the user. Now what we're looking at is a visualization of how all of our design specs link up to one another. One of the other great things about using machine-readable specs is that you can run them through a visualizer like this to see where there are any gaps and dead ends. All right, so that's how we created the CUI. But now let's talk about how we made data conversational, because this is the part that has most relevance for this talk. Before creating the ABC Emergency Voice app, we'd already created a database that brought together emergency information from around the country. And we'd already used this database to create the ABC Emergency website, which shows users a map of all the emergencies across Australia. But the challenge we had was turning this data into conversational language, actual sentences that could then be delivered via voice. Why is that important? Basically, on a website, it's fine to just list information. For instance, on the ABC Emergency website, you can just look at the map and then quickly scan the emergency data to get an idea of what's going on. But on voice platforms, this just doesn't work. You can't just list information like this. You have to actually speak it naturally, or else people aren't going to use your service. The solution for us was natural language generation. A lot of you would already know what NLG is, but some of you might not. So just to spell it out, this involves the creation of scripts written in code that determine how structured data is outputted as the sort of text that someone might actually type or say. Now, I just want to address a common misunderstanding that some people have about NLG. Some people have the impression that if you're talking about NLG, you're necessarily talking about machine learning or artificial intelligence. So basically, the idea that computers will turn data into natural language on their own. That sort of NLG does exist, as a lot of you would know, but that's not the sort of NLG that we're talking about. The sort of NLG that we're talking about does not involve machine learning or artificial intelligence at all. Instead, what we're talking about is scripts created by humans. And that means there are no surprises. Whoever creates an NLG script is in total control of the text that comes out. There are no hidden and inscrutable algorithms doing the work behind the scenes. So why is that important for us? Because when you're publishing journalism, you really do need to be accountable for the content that you publish. And so you need to be able to explain exactly how it was the decisions were made. So basically, when creating the ABC Emergency Voice app, we created scripts to turn the data on the left into the natural language sentences on the right. That text on the right is what gets added to our emergency data platform, so that it can be mapped to any nearby towns and suburbs, and then can be used by our voice app. We used our own custom-made NLG platform called Hyperdraft for creating these NLG scripts. This platform allowed us to see in real time how changes to our scripts would change the output of our emergency updates. Okay, so I've basically given you an overview of how we created the ABC Emergency Voice app. But now I want to tell you about what we see as the flaw in the service. Currently, the only way to hear one of our emergency summaries is to actively ask Alexa for an emergency update. That's not a bad thing, exactly. The ABC Emergency Voice app stands on its own 2 feet as a valuable service, providing Australians with a quicker and more efficient way of accessing the crucial emergency information that they rely on their national broadcaster for. But instead of making users come to a dedicated ABC Emergency Voice app to get the information they need, wouldn't it be better if we could just give this to them as part of their regular news service? Imagine instead being able to dynamically intersperse hyperlocal news and information, like what we're already creating for the ABC Emergency Voice app, with the regular news that people hear on their smart speakers. So as an example, when you ask your smart speaker for the news, you could be told about what's happening around your location before you then hear about the day's biggest local and national stories. And it wouldn't just be emergency news that we could offer either. It could be weather, traffic, finance, sport, basically any topic that's built upon structured data. Here's just a simple example of what it could look like. So imagine I've just asked my smart speaker for the news, and then I get a response like this. Good morning, Michael. Currently, it's cloudy and 20 degrees, with rain and a top of 24 forecast for today. The Bureau of Meteorology has issued a severe storm warning for the Northwest Slopes and Plains Forecast District. Here are your top local and national headlines. So each sentence there can be generated from structured data. That means even someone from a town of only 10 people could get a quick news update tailored to their exact location. This is something that we simply wouldn't be able to offer without automation. And it's only because of how advanced synthetic voices and text-to-speech technology has become that it's even possible to dream about this future. So just to be clear, we can't give you a timeline for our plans on any of this. It's early days. But we've already created the ABC Emergency Voice app, so we know that it's at least possible. And we're excited to see where this sort of technology could take us next. These are some of the steps that we're taking to make sure that we're ready to embrace opportunities in this space. Firstly, we're adding new types of structured data to the data platform that we created as part of the ABC Emergency project. For instance, we recently added election data. Secondly, we're exploring further opportunities for the use of NLG. For instance, we've been exploring using NLG to create localized weather reports, and we're also looking at how we could automate the creation of seat-by-seat election results. Third, we're continuing to investigate voice technologies, including finding our own solutions for synthetic voices and voice recognition. This would be crucial for the ABC to be able to offer voice experiences on its own platforms in the future, rather than only offering these services on third parties like Alexa and Google Assistant. And then fourth, we're continuing to invest in not just segmented audio, but the searchability and discoverability of audio. This is something that we need to do first if we're ever going to be able to offer our users personalized and localized streams of audio content. The ABC Emergency Voice app has already shown how the delivery of audio news can be transformed by new platforms and new technologies. But what's exciting is that this journey has only just begun for the ABC and other broadcasters around the world. Thank you so much for listening and for having me here at VOCE Global, and I'm always keen to get feedback as well. So if you do have any thoughts or questions, please send them through to me. You can see my email there on the screen. Thank you.